Good morning, everybody. You're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready for day two. Yay. All right. Awesome. So yeah, today's GP 201. There's a quiz at the end. There's not actually. I told Tony though I'm gonna send him a link to a survey, to ask for your feedback on yesterday and today's classes. And some of the more difficult questions on the survey are what classes did you take, and who was your trainer? So hi, I'm Paul, and yesterday was GP 101 and today is GP 201. So that's why that's up there. So anyway, today's agenda. We'll skip over the reminders at the end of remediation. We'll go over it really quickly because this is basically put on here before we put together that one-page little checklist for, hey, don't forget these things at the end of remediation, right? It's things like, remember to do the metadata, which you're going to do when you run a verification. And remember to add the document tag and, other stuff like that. So we'll get into that. And then remember yesterday was simple tables and today is more complex tables. We'll also deal with things like captions for figures and tables, stuff that spans multiple pages. Now, yesterday, the first document that we worked on had a paragraph that spanned across the page break, right? But today we'll deal with a list, a table of contents, and a table that spans across the page break as well. They're not really hard in concept or how to fix. There's one thing that's kind of important when you have a table that spans multiple pages. We'll go over that. But that's really kind of the most complex thing about that, if you will. Not really that tricky. Table of contents just has a bunch of parts, but it's not really that hard either. Role maps is really easy. Tagging footnotes themselves is actually pretty easy, but then sometimes the reading order decisions around footnotes can get a little bit tricky. So that might actually take a little bit of mental effort as far as like how things to consider when you've got footnotes in your document. And Jenny threw one at me yesterday that we're going to look at with footnotes in it, and like, okay, well, here you go. What are your considerations? What do you want to do? How do you want to handle that? Remember yesterday I said we don't need to put text runs together to make words. We don't need to put text elements together to make words or sentences or whatever, as long as it's tagged correctly. But sometimes we do need to split text runs, right? If we need to isolate something, for example. So we'll get into how, why, and all that stuff today for how to split text runs. Dealing with changing languages too. Do y'all deal with documents in various languages or not so much? Not really? Cool. Okay, but there's something to consider about this too, which we'll touch on this briefly. Won't spend a whole lot of time on it. But screen readers are really, really literal, right? So if the document language is set to English and the screen reader is reading in English, when, and this, I talk about this in California because the document that we use has Spanish words in it, right? Which in California, Spanish, English, it's all just kind of the same thing sometimes, right? So I, in the class today, I was like, yeah, so this is a Spanish word, and they all laughed at me because it's not. But screen readers will read more literally than, people who actually live in California, because there's no California setting for your screen reader, for example. So we'll get into some of that stuff. Advanced forms, if you thought the form yesterday was tricky, you'll think this one today is tricky too, or maybe trickier. And then there's other fun stuff like tag similar, search by tags, and generating bookmarks. That stuff is all pretty easy. So the things that are going to take the most mental effort from you, right? Complex tables, okay? Footnotes, probably, because of the reading order decisions and so on. It's not cut and dry, do this, right? So that's what kind of makes it tricky sometimes. So complex tables, footnotes, the table spanning multiple pages isn't really tricky, but it's got a lot of stuff in it that's also kind of tricky. So that one will take some mental effort, and of course the advanced forms. All right. So in your folder for GP 201, right, your GP 201 student documents folder, you can see the order of stuff. This is the order that I typically take stuff, right? 1, 2, the 3s down to 8. But we could move the order around. So for example, I would recommend starting with the complex tables, and then maybe the table, the multi-page table, because it's got some of that other more complex stuff to get into. But maybe we want to jump down and do the form next while you still have space in your head, right? And then we can come back and do some of the other stuff and kind of get easier as the day goes, right? So what do you think? This is your class. I'll take it or give it to you in whatever order you want it. Some people are already nodding like, yes, let's get the hard stuff out of the way. So yeah, is that pretty much the consensus? All right, everybody's got their coffee. We're ready to dive in. Okay, cool. Then that's what we'll do. So just to kind of fast forward here, the reminders, right? This is on the one-page checklist, right? Starts with the stuff to do in Acrobat, then there's the optional, and then there's the stuff in Common Look. Things like don't forget to do the metadata, add the document tag. Don't forget at some point to do a cleanup. Now, if you don't address metadata, it's going to come up in the verification. If you have empty tags in your document, it's going to come up when you do the verification, right? So the verification is going to catch a lot of this stuff, right? Forcing the tab order to follow the document structure. Remember that when we had the document with the links and we got the failure for it wasn't set to follow the document structure, right? And there's only one correct answer in the fix wizard to fix that. So, not really a whole lot of stuff that you really have to remember anyways, because we're going to help you with that, right? So when you're running the verification, when you get failures or even perhaps when you get warnings, use the fix wizard. Don't just change stuff to past, because that's not solving the problem, right? But use the fix wizard to solve it. And probably want to save your reports, right, as well. So anyways, just some reminders. But we'll get in and get to work. So document number 1, complex table, auto link, right? So let's go ahead and open that one up. Hopefully you remember from yesterday how to open Common Look. All right, go up to the plugins, choose Common Look PDF Global Access. You only have so many days left. Catherine, I'll try to include some kind of backtrack stuff, seeing as you weren't here yesterday. But if I don't remember what you do and don't remember, right? So please, ask. All right, if you're like, wait a minute, how, what? Because and there's some stuff that is different since the last time I trained you. All right, in the software and stuff like that. So please don't feel dumb. Ask questions. Maybe other people in the room will be glad that you felt brave and asked a question, right? So yeah, please don't feel like you're holding people back or whatever. Okay, all right. So we all have Common Look open, right? So in looking at this table, it's not really all that complex, is it? I mean, it's got a relatively simple layout. You can kind of figure out what's going on in the table. What makes this by definition a complex table is the fact that imported, domestic, and cherries are all spanning multiple columns, right? Furthermore, on the left-hand side, Perth and Adelaide are spanning multiple rows. So as soon as you have a table that has cells that span multiple columns, multiple rows, both, whatever, that's a complex table. All right, so yesterday we had column headers, row headers, everything was just 1 and 1, right? 1 column, 1 row for the span, and we were fine. Also, another thing that makes this one a complex table is the fact that you've got 3 rows worth of column headers, right? And you've got 2 columns worth of row headers, right? So when you have stacked row headers or column headers, then that's another thing that makes it complex. As soon as you have a complex table, even if it has a relatively simple layout, there's another thing that we need to do in addition to all the stuff that we did with the tables yesterday, all right? And that's linking the data cells to the header cells, okay, to make sure that when a screen reader lands on a data cell that it's going to read the correct headers, both all the way out and all the way up, okay? So we'll get into how to do that stuff, right? Open up your tag tree. Catherine, do you remember that you can just double click the, cool, all right. And then right click on your table tag and choose show table editor, right, the bottom of the context menu. show table editor, and here you go, right? So the first thing that I would do is check the layout in the table editor and make sure that the layout matches the physical view of the table, right? Aside from the fact that in the table editor, imported, domestic, and cherries are not centered in the cell, and they're not bold like they are in the physical view, does the layout in the table editor match the physical view? Yes, right? Given within tolerances, right? It's rectangular, you know, the layout is good, no empty spaces and all that stuff, right? No, like, you know, holes in the table. There's empty cells, but not empty spaces. So the layout is good, right? But do we have our headers marked in our table, right? Remember we had THs yesterday, right? No. You know that immediately because none of the cells in the table editor are blue and bold, right? That was a quick, easy way of knowing that, hey, we've got THs. Or if you click in any of the cells, you see you got TDs all over the place, but no THs, right? So let's start with assigning our headers. So when you've got complex tables, first of all, if you've got a data table, you want to make sure it's in a table, right? So we already had a table. We didn't need to generate a new one, all right? Make sure you have a table. Make sure that the layout matches the physical view, right? So that would be step 2. Step 3 is assign your headers, right? So the top 3 rows of cells are all our column headers. So I just selected the first cell, top left corner, right? If I go down 3 rows and all the way over to the right to B grade, hold down the shift key and click in B grade, then I should be able to select the top 3 rows, right? Except Jenny, you had difficulty yesterday.
My mouse doesn't do it, but I'll try it with the arrows.
Yeah, you can do it with the arrows and stuff like that.
It works with arrows.
Cool. All right, so do you have the whole top 3 rows selected? And then we need to convert those to TH and give them the scope column, right? So that was which button up at the top of the table editor? The 5th one, right? If you hover the mouse over it, it reminds you. Convert to TH, set the scope to column. So hit that one. All right, there you go. Now we're going to do same thing with our row headers. So click in the cell for Perth, and then you're going to go over 1 column and all the way down to retail and select that block, right? So you've got Perth, Adelaide, 2 wholesales and 2 retails selected. Yes? Cool. And then the 4th button from the left, right, we'll convert those to TH and set the scope to row. Right? Yes. With me so far? Yeah. Cool. So because this table in its layout is relatively simple, right? All of the column headers relate directly to everything below them. The row headers relate to everything directly to the right of them. This is pretty simple in its layout. Once we've assigned our headers, we have to link the data cells to the header cells to make sure that everything gets read correctly, but we can do that automatically using the 2nd button from the left at the top of the table editor. You hover your mouse over it, says generate 1 level linked headers. When you hit that button, all the magic happens. Of course, all the magic happens behind the scenes and you don't actually see anything that actually happened. But if you click in a data cell, well, for example, I clicked in this one for $8, then I see that retail becomes gray and B grade becomes gray, right? So it's showing me that that cell has been linked to these 2 headers. Furthermore, if I click, for example, in wholesale and retail, I see that that's linked to Perth. A grade and B grade are linked to cherries. Apricots and cherries over here are linked to imported, and then over here they're linked to domestic, and so on, right? So now $1.80, right? So I clicked in this cell. It's been linked to this empty one, right? But by extension, this empty one is linked to apricots. So when a screen reader is reading this, it's going to read that space really, really fast. It sounds like absolutely nothing, right? And it's just going to go to $1.80, right? So that's what you get, is you'll get the row headers. You get Perth, retail, domestic, apricots, $1.80, right? So that's how that works, okay? Any questions on that? now. Pretty straightforward, I think. This button here, the third one from the left, also links data cells to header cells. All right, so I'll just mention this for the fun of it. If I choose this one, right, again, all the work happens behind the scenes. But now, for example, when I click in $1.80, it shows me that it's been linked to all of the headers, right? Remember before it just showed the first level. Now it shows that it's actually linked to all 3 levels of column headers and 2 levels of row headers, right? This actually goes against the standard, but we included it in our software because some clients asked for it, right? Some clients wanted to see that when they clicked on a cell that it was linked to all of the headers, right, as opposed to just one. Now, PDF specification is really tricky to understand, but basically what it says is you need to link your data cells to the first level of headers, which is why we had this button for generate one level link headers, right? PDF specification for accessibility says you link the cells to the first level of headers. And then the way that screen readers are supposed to work, remember, if the screen reader reads according to the standard, then, so if a screen reader lands on 1250 over here, we link it to retail and B grade with the one level. But then screen readers are supposed to, when it finds that it's linked to retail, it's supposed to then, on its own, keep looking to see, are there any other headers that are there, and if so, follow it all the way out until it's done finding headers. Either it lands on a data cell or it's out of the table. And then similarly, it goes up to find the column header, and if it finds a column header, it keeps going, right, looking for other ones. So you don't have to do this, the recursive thing. But like I said, some clients asked for it, so we gave it to them, right? The downside to this, however, is if you've got a screen reader that's really reading according to the standard, like very literally, like this is what it says, this is what we do. When you use this button to get this kind of linking, what can happen then is sometimes screen readers will read the headers twice, right? Because you've linked it, so you're basically forcing it to read it, but it's also going according to the standard, and so it's looking for it anyways, right? So our remediation team, when we're remediating documents for clients, we use this one, right, the one level linked headers, unless our clients specifically ask for do the recursive, right? So I'm showing you that it's there, I'm telling you what it does and all that stuff. My recommendation for you, because you don't know what screen reader your end users are using, I would go with this one here, the one level linked headers, right? So that linking looks like that, and then screen readers take it the rest of the way. All right, so that's what the buttons do, and that's some decision making on your end for which one you want to use. Right? Any questions on this one? Yes.
So as long as you create the headers properly, and then there shouldn't ever be a problem with it linking to the incorrect.
Not in a simple layout like this, right? So the next document, we're going to take it to another level of complexity where there will be a problem and how to fix it. Yep. But as long as your layout is simple like this and only complex in that you have multiple rows of column headers, or cells that span multiple things, right? As long as that's the only level of complexity, this will work. Okay, yeah. Part B of that question is coming soon. Any other questions with this? No? Cool. Okay, good. Then you can either save it or not save it, close. Remember, you would want to, walk the whole tag tree, run your verification and all that good stuff. Okay. Yeah, you know what? While I'm thinking about it, you know what? I'm not going to mention it because Catherine had to go to her meeting. But when she comes back, we were just talking about it. Are you back already? Okay, cool. So, you know what? When you run the verification, remember you've got your structural check and you've got your accessibility check, right? WCAG 2.0, right? When you run the structural check, you're going to get a warning for you have empty cells in your table, right? Because you have 6 empty cells right here, and you have 2 more empty cells there, right? So you're going to get errors, or you're going to get these warnings for you have empty cells in your table. If you try with the warning to use the fix wizard, the recommendation is going to be to remove the empty cells from the table. However, if you remove the empty cells from the table, then you're not going to have a regularly shaped table, right? So then you've just created another headache for yourself, right? So realizing that you need these empty cells in your table, right? Because we've linked, and you might even want to do this with simple tables that have empty cells in them, you might want to link stuff anyways. You're not going to hurt anything linking up a simple table, you just don't need to. But when you get these error messages then, these warnings for having empty cells, right? Because you've linked the data cells to the header cells, you can change that warning, right? So in edit checkpoint status, right, change the warning to what we do in the remediation team. We change it to skipped, right? So set the status to skipped. I'll just show you too. So if I run the structural check, right? Let me close the table editor. I think it's warning. No, is it? Thanks, Paul. Okay, maybe it's under. No, I know I can force it with HHS because HHS really doesn't like it. HHS is really picky. They changed HHS too. I can't force this to work how I want it to. You may get an error though at some point for not having, you're having empty cells in your table. No empty tags. Yes, there are. Oh, you know why? Because there's, let's see. No. Anyways, I was trying to force it. I can't make it happen. But if you get the error message for having empty cells, empty tags in your tables, you can change the status to skipped, and then in the comments, I would write in the use of linked headers preempts any issues that screen readers may have with empty cells. I'll repeat that for you if you want to write it down. So change the status to skipped, and then, yeah, I can't force this one. The comment to write, the use of linked headers preempts any issues that screen readers may have with empty cells. Oh, that's why. Because they're not actually empty. There's a character in there. Ha! Make me look stupid. Here you go. So when you run your structural check, there was a space in those cells, right? So that technically they weren't empty. So here you go. A tag type of TH is empty. Consider removing it. But you don't want to because you're going to mess up your table, right? So here's where you change the warning to, what we do is skipped. You could choose passed. Passed might make your boss a little bit happier than skipped, because if your boss is looking over your report and say, well, hey, why did you skip this, right? So, but what we do is we change it to skipped, and then the use of linked headers preempts any issues can't spell, may have with empty. Right? The use of linked headers preempts any issues that screen readers may have with empty cells. Remember, in your report, that'll show up in the comments. So when your boss says, well, hey, why did you skip this? Because the use of linked headers solves this problem. Now, you want to make sure that you link the headers, right? Because if you're saying, hey, the use of linked headers solves this problem, but then you didn't link them, then you're not really solving the problem. So, yes?
Could you briefly explain the difference
I usually just go straight to WCAG.
Yeah, so that's kind of maybe one difference from before. We always recommend now doing both the structural and the WCAG check, right? So the structural check tests, so ISO 32000 is how to make a PDF, right? So making sure that like the PDF is built correctly. And for things like if you have tables, making sure that your table tag contains table rows, right, the TRs, and then the TRs contain TDs or THs, right? So on a list, you've got your list tag with your list items, with your labels and your L bodies inside, right? So for example, if I had a table tag that didn't have TRs and it just went straight to TD or TH, then in my structural check, I would get errors for bad parenting, right? And the bad parenting error depends. Sometimes it's that like this tag can't have this as a parent, right? Or sometimes it's this tag can't have this tag as a direct child, right? So that's why it's a bad parenting thing. But it tests to make sure that stuff is done correctly like that. It also checks to make sure that links aren't broken, right? So if you have a link in your document, it'll try to go there to make sure that it can actually go there, right? So we recommend doing both the structural and then the WCAG check, because you can have a document that passes everything structurally speaking that is still not accessible, right? So we recommend doing both. If you want your report to show that you did both, then choose structural and then hold down, for example, the control key and choose WCAG. And then when you run your full check, then it tests against, right? So here's WCAG 2.0 and here's ISO 32000, right? So then your report will show, you'll take care of all of those things, and then your report will show that everything passed both checks, all right? But remember from yesterday, if you need to change something like the alt text and then you have to run an incremental check, you would have to remember to go back and choose structural and WCAG and then run your incremental check. Does that make sense? Okay. Get that, Tony?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yep. So if we have to change, for example, the alternative text on an image, right? And then you have to run your incremental check. If you ran against both structural and WCAG, right, when you're going back to run your incremental, you have to choose both of them again. Because if I just choose WCAG and then run incremental, now I'm not testing against ISO 32000, right? So I need to test against both to get both to come up, right? Okay. This is where the confusion comes in. I'm going to resize this just a bit. So in the standards panel, I can run the structural check right from here, right? Right now, I can do this, and I'm only going to test against ISO 32000. Now, remember I said yesterday that we're working on ISO 32000-2. So once we get ISO 32000-2, there will be both in here, and you can test against 1 and 2, right? For now, you can click on just structural and run against the one thing that's in there. Right? However, if I click on accessibility and run it, it's going to test against all 4 standards. So then your results panel is going to be massive with all of the warnings and failures and anything, because something that fails against WCAG probably fails against all 4, and you're going to have 4 times as many failures to address, right? So make sure that you open stuff up. I would recommend just open it up, choose ISO 32000, choose WCAG, and then run your check. All right? Save yourself some pain. Okay. All right. How are we doing? We good? Already done? Some people look tired already. It's going to be a long day. Oh, God. All right. Save and close, or don't save? Okay.